I was DOTC's first undersecretary for railways and mass transit projects. It was during my watch that MRT3 was inaugurated. That was in July of 2000.
Why are you not with the OTC at this time?
Well, I served during the presidency of President Estrada, and when President Arroyo took over, uh, she decided to bring in people of her own choosing. And so when a replacement for me came in, I decided to go into retirement.
You were with the MRT since its inauguration. Can you describe how it was back then?
Well, back then, under my watch, it was, of course, a brand new system. And so it was running the way all brand new systems would run. It had a 10-year maintenance contract that would have assured the continuation of the system's performance over the years covered by the contract. The maintenance contract covered both operations maintenance as well as parts replacement, and I believe that included track works as well.
How would you compare it with the MRT today?
Well, the MRT today, to be fair, is now a 15-year-old system since its inauguration, and consequently, the 15 years of daily operations, especially under the loading conditions because of the increased ridership, had worn down the system as any system would wear down, through usage. But then again, proper maintenance would have compensated for that. With proper maintenance, uh, rail vehicles and track works should last for several decades.
Where and when do you think the problem started?
Well, all right. If you look at the history of the operations and maintenance of MRT3, uh, you will notice that the performance seemed to have uh, adequately supported the growth, the increase in ridership. In fact, at a certain point, ridership peaked off at a level that was actually beyond the rated capacity of the system to carry. It was actually a system overload. Nevertheless, the system managed to carry that load uh, up to the term of the contract that was in place. I believe the contract then was for a period of 10 years. Then I heard, I was no longer in the country uh, at that time, but I learned that a new contractor took over the maintenance, and it seems that there were some operations difficulties that were associated with maintenance performance. But again, I am not privy to, I had not witnessed it myself, so I might not be the right person to comment on it. Nevertheless, I still regularly visit the Philippines. I now reside outside of the Philippines. And on my visits here, I make it a point to ride the MRT, and it's a tight ride, a bit crowded. But so are many rail systems in the world, like in Japan, for example. You have people who push, riders into the train to fit them all in. Um, and so that is a normal, occurrence in any urban rail system. But the condition of the trains themselves and the tracks, because I can, being in this industry, I can feel when track works are properly maintained, as a rider. And I noticed that the track works seem to be needing some attention. No? I have also, on my visits to the Philippines, I have been in touch with MRT3 operators who were hired during my time. Uh, I have I used to be a hands-on undersecretary, so to the point where I knew most of the operators of our trains. Some of them even became I became their ninong sa kasal when they would get married, and ninong to their children as well. Um, if I may, I would like to relate a very touching uh, uh, lunch that I had with a couple of operators and their families. And the families were thankful that their husbands had a good job, but they were apprehensive, no? Pretty much like the wives of airline pilots when their husband would leave, for a flight. They would always, of course, be naturally concerned that they would safely return home from their flight. But they naturally would also be confident in the proper maintenance of the aircraft. So they were pretty sure that, God willing, their husbands would come back safe and sound at the end of each flight. Well, it seems not so with the wives of our operators. They now live in constant fear that something untoward might happen, and their husband might his safety might be compromised due to what they perceive to be uh, unreasonably unsafe driving conditions for their husband. No? And again, as I said, I have not really had an opportunity to take a close look, a close professional look at the condition of our trains, the signaling system, the track works. So I cannot say with certainty that their fears are well founded. But given what I read, of course, sometimes when certain things are reported in various media, the people who make these reports might be overly excited about certain fears, and certain things might be exaggerated, no? But then again, I seem to have read about certain breakdowns taking place. And again, from a professional viewpoint, I fear that those breakdowns are indicative of likelihood that a more serious uh, event could take place. A train could get derailed, uh, and if the signaling system should break down, and the operator is unable to quickly switch over to manual control, and if the operator has not had the experience yet of being in a situation where he finds the signaling system down, no, coupled with another situation such as loss of brakes, which I understand has sometimes happened, it could lead to a very serious accident that could bring injury, maybe even worse, not just to the operator and his passengers, but God forbid, if a vehicle should get derailed and fall down into or onto EDSA, well, there could be a lot of people getting hurt down there. So, as I said, I could not give any comforting words to those two wives of two operators, except to tell them that well, of course, they can only pray. But then again, better than prayers would be probably the authorities or the department itself, no, looking with more concern, no, and giving a great deal of priority to attending to these safety issues.
So as you mentioned, there have been reported breakdowns of the MRT. Why do you think DOTC ignored the issue sounding it for so long?
Well, all right. Again, uh, to be fair, uh, I really would not know, no, because I am not privy to the current set of priorities that the OTC has. As you know, the responsibilities of the DOTC cover not just land transportation, but air transportation, sea transport as well. No? So they do have a lot of concerns. There are budget limitations, no? And there's so many other considerations outside of the technical. But on the other hand, no, uh, perhaps uh, again, as a former DOTC official, uh, I would always refer my colleagues, no, who are now at the helm of the OTC, to always be mindful of the primary mandate, not just of the OTC, but of every uh, transportation authority in any country. That the primary mandate of a country's transportation authority is to provide the general public, no, with a safe, sufficient, no, affordable, and reliable means of transportation. Because transportation is almost a human right, because you deprive human beings, no, of the freedom to move around if if a government does not provide them with the means to do so, with an affordable means to do so. It would be discrimination against the poor if the poor are not able to go from one place to another, and therefore they are disadvantaged in terms of being able to compete in this highly competitive world. No? So that is the primary mandate of any government agency that is in charge of its country's transportation system.
Let's go to the maintenance of the MRT. What do you think? What is your opinion on the MRT's original maintenance provider, Sumitomo?
Well, as I recall, no, it was actually a fairly simple, cut and dried, easy to understand maintenance arrangement. No? MRTC then contracted its responsibilities to maintain the system to Sumitomo. No? And Sumitomo was assisted in its assumption of these maintenance obligations by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. No? Both Sumitomo and Mitsubishi enjoy a global reputation for performance. No? And I believe, let me see, I believe the contract was for 10 years, and the contract amount escalated over the first 6 years, initially from around $15 million to $18 million midway, maybe around the fifth or the sixth year, up to the end of the 10th year. No? So if the system was inaugurated in 2000, then that contract should have expired in 2010. I understand that, from what I have read, that it was extended for a while, but then again, after a year or so, the terms were rewritten, and a bidding, it was bidded out. There seems to have been some controversy over the bidding procedures and the award, but more important than that, really, is the bottom line. No? Was the system being maintained in the meantime that this controversy was going on? Or because there was so much focus on who should have the contract and whether the contractors were qualified or what, whether during this period of controversy, whether anyone was concerned about the proper maintenance of the trains and the tracks to keep them in safe operating condition. This, to me, would be the primordial point of interest, Who is minding the store? Who is taking care of the maintenance in the meantime that this controversy is taking place? So, I'm no longer there, and it might not be fair for an outsider like me to be making commentaries, on people who are in charge and who have a lot of things on their plate. But nevertheless, as an occasional rider and as someone who has relatives who ride the MRT3 every day, I'm naturally concerned that the equipment, both trains and the track works, should be in proper maintenance and in safe operating condition at all times.
So, we know that Sumitomo was replaced by a company that was involved in a controversy. Would you have recommended that the DOTC extended its contract?
Well, one of my principles in life has always been, pardon the grammar, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. No? So if there was nothing wrong with the maintenance performance of Sumitomo, and the Philippine government would still afford to sustain the contract at that particular cost level, why change them? No? I mean, if something is, if you're wearing a nice pair of shoes, that is very comfortable, okay, why change it? If there's nothing wrong with it, there are no holes in the sole, getting you to, when you walk from one place to another, it would be shameful to just throw away a good pair of shoes. Likewise, something that has always been performing very well, would require a very good reason to replace. Again, as I said, I'm not aware of the circumstances leading to the decision to get another contractor. So that's really the call of the people who are currently seated at the OTC.
What do you think of the government's current expansion project for the railway system?
Well, I believe that before you can think of expansion, you should first attend to what you have and make sure it's running well. No? Because if you cannot even maintain what you already have, why are you going to add to your responsibilities by extending a system or expanding it when the one that you currently have is not working very well?
Now, how risky are the MRT trains for the riding public and for the operators as well?
I'm sorry?
How risky are the MRT trains for the riding public and for the operators?
Well, for the riding public and for the operators, the primary obligation is to keep them safe when they are on board the MRT. Safety. Then of course you need to board them, you need to board the passengers in reasonable comfort. If a passenger is going to take a 30-minute ride, it is unreasonable for him to wait for an hour to get into the train in the first place. The waiting time takes longer than the actual travel time. This defeats the purpose of a high-speed mass transit system. High speed yung sakay, low speed yung boarding. So it one negates the other. You kill the advantage that you gain. We invested so heavily in a high speed, people mover, and yet we are very low speed in getting them on board that vehicle. No? And then once they're on board, you make sure you get them in one piece, no, to their destination. It is our obligation to give them a safe ride and a comfortable one, reasonably comfortable one.
Do you believe that there's a feasible solution to the MRT or to the EDSA traffic in general?
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, the solutions are premised, first of all, on the budget, on funding. If you don't have funding, you can think up of the best solutions in the world, but if you don't have the funding for it, it's not going to happen. No? I believe there is funding. In fact, unless it has been changed, I believe that the relationship between MRTC and DOTC is a PPP, public-private partnership. So the government and private sector work together to deliver this transportation system. Okay. So it is the responsibility of the private partner to provide the working equipment and the funding for this. They raise the funding, and then they lease this to the DOTC for the DOTC to operate, and the DOTC takes on the obligation to return, the cost incurred by the private sector with a reasonable amount of profit for them. Okay, so that is the very essence of this public-private partnership. So the solution lies in the hands of, the DOTC and the MRTC. They have to work together, as we had worked together during my watch to make the system happen. That led to its inauguration. It was running very nicely for 10 years. So why can we not continue that? Okay. So before we expand, let's fix what we already have. Sayang, we invested so much. I think MRTC had borrowed something close to about $700 million at that time. No? In today's monetary values, that probably would be running close to nearly $1 billion by now if we were to replicate what was built originally. So again, it's all about a partnership between government and the private sector for the government first to design and plan the delivery system for mass transportation, and for the private sector to bring in the funding.
Apparently, the private sector has submitted a couple of proposals for the expansion of the MRT before.
I heard about that, yes.
Why do you think that DOTC ignored those?
Well, any plan that the private sector submits to government where it is a no-cost to government arrangement and the returns to investment being sought by the private sector can be considered reasonable, is something that the government should seriously look at. Unless the Philippine government has sufficient funding of its own to bring in this expansion. Yes, I read about that. I think the plan would have brought in initially a certain amount of funding to attend to the maintenance needs, to upgrade, to restore the current system to its previous inaugural levels. That was a good start. Bring it back up to 72 or 73 fully operational trains. Yeah, when we inaugurated this, there were 73. I think now it's around 20 or a little less. So ridership capacity has been seriously impaired. Um, so yes, attend to that first. And apparently the offer included uh, the funding necessary to bring up the current level of performance to the inaugural levels. Second, expansion with additional train cars. Well, uh, from end to end, if I remember the figure correctly, I think MRT3 is only a little over 17 kilometers. No? So, with the safest possible headway or distance between trains, you can only run so many trains on it. No? Ideally, of course, you put in an infinite number of trains to accommodate every passenger who wishes to ride, but you can't do that. It's impossible. No? You need another line, either parallel, underground, or even higher above ground, which is ridiculous, of course. But all I'm saying is that you can only fit in so many trains on a 17-kilometer stretch. Okay? So the ridership support will level off at a certain level. So obviously that has been studied by this private proponent, no? Who is talking about expansion. And clearly, they would have arrived at a certain number, no, which would represent the maximum number of trains that you can load on the system. And having said that, I feel that if you can raise ridership to a comfortable, no, uh, 1.3 to 1.5 million passengers per day, that would just about be the maximum that one line operating on EDSA can take. No? But there will be collateral benefits to the traffic underneath on EDSA if you can transfer 1.2 to 1.5 million riders from vehicles on EDSA onto, MRT3. No? That would free up, that would allow you to actually reduce number of commercial transportation on EDSA, like buses. In fact, I believe at the time we inaugurated MRT3 in July of 2000, we were saying, that for every, I think it was 1,000 or 1,200 riders on MRT3, we could remove one bus from EDSA. So if you have 1 million riders on MRT3, you can remove 1,000 buses from EDSA and deploy them in some other parts of Metro Manila, okay, where they might be more needed. And if you have 1,000 buses less on EDSA, can you imagine the relief that this would give to the other motor vehicles and the savings in economic time value of people? Everyone's time is worth a certain amount of money. And if they spend that much time on EDSA, you are unfairly depriving them, no, of economic earnings, of adding to their economic contribution to the country. I read somewhere that we are currently losing on EDSA traffic alone, no, over 1 billion pesos per day. No? I can believe that. Over 1 billion pesos per day in economic contribution lost, no, by people who have used up their time, no, just sitting in a vehicle along EDSA. So those would be the collateral effects of a poorly running mass transit system.
Okay, so that's it, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to talk.
Do you have anything else to add?
Uh, well, again, my concern goes back to the human side. No, everything I read about the MRT3 issues, no, has always been about, of course, no, with good reason, the riders, no, the traffic along EDSA, no, the safety issues. No. But there has never been much, if any at all, no? Any concern raised about the operators and the employees of MRT3. No? I read about an accident that occurred uh, involving an operator and his train. The train lost its brakes. And immediately, the action was, instead of attending to the vehicle defect that led to the accident, the loss of brakes, uh, the driver was dismissed. No? He lost his ability to support his family financially. No? Why take it out on the driver? Well, I can understand why. No? If the agency took the responsibility for a vehicle that lost its brakes, then it would be admitting that it failed in its maintenance responsibilities. And since the agency did not seem to be inclined to admit that, they instead passed on the blame to the operator. And this operator is ruined for life. No transit agency in the world will ever hire him, no? Since he was dismissed for, for neglectful driving that caused an accident, putting in jeopardy the lives of so many of his passengers. Again, no, if anybody among the passengers was injured and their lawyers decide to sue, who would they sue? They would sue the person who was pointed to as being at fault. They would sue the driver. Where would he get the money? No? To pay damages. Okay? And if he is obliged by the courts to pay damages, he would be financially ruined for the rest of his life. So we have to give concern to the operators as well and to their families. It is always usually the most helpless in society that get the least attention. So I would like to end my comments on that note. No? And let's give some attention to the concerns of the operators and the employees of MRT3.
Thank you, sir.